there was something else said about the desperation of the empire, a little bit of the desperation of the empire. Well, empires become more desperate as everything that they used to dominate is removed from them. Look, China is outstripping them in everything, not just China, but the whole of Asia. And a lot of people don't want to come to grips with this. The reason China is a threat to the United States is because it is a non-white, non-Western nation. That is one of the main things, and they cannot see a nation like that becoming the preeminent power, because they feel that China may do to them what they've done to everybody else. That is what's pressing them. And I believe that the stripping of the fat is not because they want to. It's because it is a necessity now, because they don't have the financial, the geopolitical, or the political capital anymore. So that's why you saw the theatrics on TV to try to build up capital around the world to say Trump is washing his hands with Zelensky. Zelensky is ungrateful. This gives them a way out. So and it also saves face for the empire. So I think all of this is part of the theatrics of a failing, falling, collapsing empire. And America can, with Walt Disney, with Hollywood, can turn a defeat into the greatest victory ever. And that's what I'm saying right now when we're watching them. They're trying to turn defeat into victory because they want perception. They want to win the perception of the people. They want the people to believe that, okay, the United States is turning a page from its aggression. The United States is really trying to turn a page and negotiate peace. They have never wanted peace. If they did, cut the funding off.
Yes.
Cut the weapon sales off. Tell the war manufacturers, we will not fund you anymore. That will instantly put peace on the near horizon. But instead, they continue to string this along because they want that to smolder. They want the Ukrainian-Russian conflict to smolder because they believe that if they can take Iran out and take China out, then they can come back, blow on the smoldering fire, and it turns into a 3-alarm fire, and then they can finally take Russia out.
Yeah, like Syria, like the freeze in Syria, the U.S. occupation in the east, Turkey's intervention and occupation of the north, and they just put it on pause. But it wasn't really pause. And even Trump saying, I'm cutting the covert funding for arms and weapons, but obviously it continued because that force that the U.S. was backing expanded over time, and they continued putting pressure on Syria the entire time. Plus, they were extending Russia and Iran everywhere else, so that when the time came to do the final push, they wouldn't be able to do it. It's all part of extending Russia by the Rand Corporation 2019. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's the blueprint, and they're following it word for word. I wanted to, before we move on, I just wanted to show people this. This is from the BBC, and this was 6 years ago. This was the BBC talking about how Zelensky was picked specifically because he was an actor. Not just that, but he was in a movie about a school teacher who became president of Ukraine. And they desperately wanted to tap into that, to convince the Ukrainian people to vote for him. And what did he pledge while he was campaigning? Peace with Russia, the end of the war. And it did not materialize. They had no intention of materializing it. Does that sound familiar? I want to also point out that President Donald Trump is also an experienced actor. He was the host of The Apprentice for 14 seasons. I think that translates to about 14 years, isn't it? A season per year. And so this is what he did all throughout the show, exactly what he did in the White House. And he was also, let me turn the volume off here. What's going on here? He was a regular guest on professional wrestling, WWE, and it's interesting. Let's see if I can get a part where Donald Trump is in there. And what they would do is build up the excitement in the audience. He would challenge Ed McMahon to come into the ring and fight him then and there instead of this match where they had two wrestlers they picked would fight. as their champions. And Ed McMahon was walking away from the ring, and everyone started booing, and then he walked back towards it, and everyone got excited again. And they really know how to push people's buttons. What makes you think that they're not doing that in Washington? If we look, if we all accept the fact that you can go look it up, the same special interests are funding all of the candidates on both sides of the political aisle. And they're the ones making the policy. What makes you think these politicians exist to do anything but perform theatrics, to manipulate public perception, both in the US, in Europe, and all around the rest of the world? Danny, let's go back to you. What do you think about that? And then where I want to go next is evidence, emerging evidence that the continuity of agenda continues. I want to talk about Venezuela and also Thailand and China, which were recently in the news. Danny.
Well, I want to focus on Trump's administration, because everything that you said about acting, performance, entertainment, it's a huge part of the U.S. political circus. And arguably, while Donald Trump was an entertainer in the past, the place of political office, especially as a U.S. president, I believe is very fitting for him, given that history, because everyone who comes in is an actor in some way. And actually, whoever is selected to be president of the United States must be a good actor. So Zelensky's a very bad actor. Zelensky came in and he immediately turned about face. There was not even any kind of grace period that the Trump administration is trying to give his political base right now. But Donald Trump is much different. Donald Trump is actually a very effective actor, and we could say actor in all sorts of ways. Actor as literally entertainer, or actor in terms of how he pursues his political agenda. But all this to say is just look at his administration. Everyone fawns over J.D. Vance. Everyone says he's the new wave of what it means to be a militant, working class oriented politician. But just look at how he came about. He comes out of big finance, and Peter Thiel, the PayPal oligarch, is his primary backer. Then we could look at Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, that wrote the so-called minerals deal. He is a hedge fund operative who, and this is just absolutely insane, who is a partner for Soros Fund Management. So all this George Soros, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump, George Soros, the big enemy. Scott Bessent is literally the money guy. He is the Secretary of Treasury in the United States, and he wrote that minerals deal as a huge public relations gift to BlackRock and the so-called investors that come in with their IMF directives to decimate and plunder economies like Ukraine. So the Trump administration is no doubt reorienting, shifting its approach, and some of that will come about in a shift in policy, because we have to be 100% real. When Donald Trump says something, when he has calls with Putin, when these meetings happen, they are real changes in policy. If we look at policy as just the actions of a president, but in terms of the overall strategic imperatives, how the system operates, it's quite clear that what we are seeing, which generally happens every presidential cycle, is an attempt to rebrand and redirect our attention to a new kind of form of empire, of expansionism, of aggression, and of course of the same oligarchic and corporate interests that are seeking to profit from all of it. Because it's just so unimaginable to believe that the forces backing, the Adelsons backing Trump, the Palantirs and the PayPal oligarchs like Peter Thiel, the Soros Fund Management, the hedge funds that are in charge of OpenAI, all to believe that they don't want to see U.S. militarism around the world is just completely detached from reality. These so-called companies, these monopolies, they are dependent upon the wars that help them open up opportunities for their parasitic exploitation of other countries without economic war, without militarism, without the US's aggressive posture around the world. They simply cannot operate. Why? And we're going to probably get into this. The forces of multipolarity like Russia, like China, and even the smaller countries you mentioned, Brian, Venezuela, Cuba, others, they're doing their own. They want a new alternative. They want a new path. They don't want to be under the thumb of US directives and hegemony and dominance. And they're going to build their own world order, and they already are, that serves their interests for development, for peace, for stability. That's anathema to the empire. Donald Trump is not going to sit back and say, well, China, continue to be the biggest economy, keep growing, keep being stable, keep advancing in tech, keep alleviating poverty, keep advancing infrastructure, and keep ascending as a power that all the rest of the global south looks at as an example, not only of success, but what a genuine leadership looks like on the global stage, one that includes not only international law, but also a sense of, well, we are all equals in this world together. Absolutely not. The United States wants to be on top. Everything Donald Trump has said has been about the U.S. Being on top, getting back to the top. That's his whole campaign. That's his whole ideological posture from the very beginning. Even if you just look at America first, it's never America first. Well, we need to take care of these XYZ needs. Even when he plays to those needs of ordinary people, it really is all about, well, the United States has to be the juggernaut. It has to be the best. But I would argue that if the United States is actually going to address its problems, it has to be normal. It has to be equal and one with other countries around the world, because how else can you address pressing needs like the enormous debt that people are saddled with? I was just at the grocery store. There's a huge letter at the grocery store near me saying, sorry that eggs are so expensive and food has gotten so expensive, but we can't do anything about it. And they've stripped the price tags from all of the shelves that have the eggs. It's absolutely ridiculous what's going on. The homelessness, the poverty, all. If you're going to address those problems, well, you cannot be the empire, the outstretched and overburdened empire that the United States is. But I haven't seen one indication that this is going to change fundamentally. It may change at the surface, it may change how it looks, but fundamentally, these companies, those who back the Trump administration, won't allow it.
Absolutely. Okay, Rasheed, but I just want to throw in this real quick because Danny said something that reminded me of this excuse I hear very often from Trump supporters. Trump is a businessman. War is bad for business. Please ask Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, General Atomic, Anduril, if war is really bad for business, because they would disagree. They have a multi-trillion-dollar industry built on selling weapons to fuel perpetual war. Rasheed, please go ahead.
I wanted to piggyback off Danny when he was talking about Peter Thiel and how he built JD Vance. Let us not forget that Elon Musk was also a co-founder of PayPal, and he just recently stated that that's going to be your future president. This was on RT. They were talking about this, but this MAGA stuff. I want to go back to the MAGA real quick. All one has to do to see if Trump is really America's first and pushing America first is to say, before you put any more money into war, there was a HUD study about homelessness, and it said it would take $20 billion, 20, not 30, 40, 50, or 60, $20 billion to erase or eradicate homelessness in the United States. So if he's really about America first, then put the money where your mouth is, and instead of allocating the $20 billion to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, quote unquote Ukraine, divert some of that money, the $20 billion, and eradicate the poverty. The homelessness. That should be easy because it's not $80 billion, it's not $100 billion, it's not $200 billion. The studies went on for a few years, and it said it would take $20 billion. So that's not asking for much. If he really wants to prove that he's America first, deal with Americans' problems instead of focusing on Asia, because charity starts at home, then it spreads abroad.
Yes, absolutely. Angelo, before with the next thing I want to talk about is the emerging evidence that no, nothing really is changing. It continues. Angelo, go ahead.
Yeah. Just also Peter Thiel, by the way, also was the first external funder, investor into Facebook. So I mean, he's extremely powerful. I just want to add one thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book of Ray Dalio. It is about the explaining the raising and declining power. And when you look at the U.S., what is happening is that in his theory is that the country, when it's declining, it's losing its currency hegemony. Then also there's internal divisions. We're seeing like the U.S. has never been so divided. What we're seeing here, we don't see it is not that obvious for average Joe, but there's what I would call the night of long knives, between two factions of oligarchs within the U.S. Now you have indicators that are extremely important, that actually are extremely alarming, is human indicators. You have infant mortality, it's actually going up. You have life expectancy, which is going down. You have fertility, but this is all the world. But, in addition, you have also that. So a lot of indicators, and also, like just disposable income, poverty and so on. Those are extremely alarming. And those are the indicators that show clearly that the U.S. is about to collapse. And I forgot. So that, every time an empire is about to collapse because it has too much debt. Now, how are you going to build up this new wealth? You have to go after your biggest enemy when it comes to the reason you have that debt of all this trade deficit is China. And what we're seeing here is the parallel. I draw a parallel with the Opium War. The British Empire was actually buying much more from China than China was buying from the British Empire. And they had no silver, because silver was the main currency, the main, money back then. That's the same right now. And what they want to do with Trump is, it is about, containing. He's going to steal from Europe by selling more gas, by imposing more military spending. And China, by containing China, probably blockade over choke points and so on. So those are the elements that we need to understand that, it's they are there, and those are structural. And the only way for Trump to deliver what he wants to deliver, that's that's the shortcut. If he really wanted to tackle the problems of America, make America great again, it's very simple. Education, make people healthier, disposable income, better share of the wealth. The wealth has, all the wealth. When you look at the increase of productivity, that's how you see the wealth. Average Joe has seen zero, while you have seen extremely high increase of productivity. Who got that share was people with capital, was the 1%, and that's why it's not sustainable.
And Angelo, you were just saying, if President Trump really wanted to make America great, he would invest in all of these things: education, infrastructure. They would invest in infrastructure, not even talking about doing this. And I was watching this, listening to this 3-hour-long hearing in Congress about how to counter China. And all throughout this 3-hour hearing, they were like, China's stealing, cheating, robbing us, stealing all of our ideas, but then they admit that they're leading in technology. So how can you be stealing ideas if you're leading? Doesn't make any sense. But toward the end, someone, I forget who it was, but someone admitted China is investing in infrastructure and we are not. That's actually the key to why China is rising and pulling away from the US, and the US is where it is. And so that really is the key. That is your first clue that Trump is not fixing or changing anything. He is not addressing and prioritizing what needs to be done to actually make America for Americans great again. It is making America great for the corporate monopolies that are losing out on multipolarism. As Danny said, these alternatives are made available. People choose them because they're obviously superior to what these monopolies have on offer. Now, I want to talk about these things that are so obviously telling us that nothing is changing. This whole thing with Russia, a lot of people are holding their breath and waiting to see if Minsk 3.0 turns out any different than the first two Minsk agreements. Angelo just talked about maritime choke points. Angelo and I have talked about this for years. This is all the think tanks talk about. We need to control these choke points. In a conflict with China, we'll shut off their maritime shipping and destroy their economy because we can't beat them head on in a conflict. And that has only grown louder in these think tanks, which ultimately is reflected, including in the Senate and House hearings. Venezuela, I was just posting something about Venezuela. President Trump to end license in Venezuela, Chevron license in Venezuela, and blow to Maduro. And so this is more about crushing the Venezuelan economy. Angelo has been to Venezuela. He's seen with his own eyes the destruction this has done to the people living there. So there's your next clue. And then just this week, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is butting in on Thai and Chinese relations. There were these Uyghur terror suspects who came to Thailand illegally. Thailand arrested them, and then they sent them back to China. And there was a large number of them, hundreds of them, because there were thousands of them going through Southeast Asia to Turkey to cross the border and join ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And this was a network the U.S. and its allies were running around the entire planet to supply fighters for the proxy war. They eventually won in Syria. And so Secretary Rubio, let me just put it up on the screen here real quick, and I want to get everybody's reaction to these things. So Thailand deports dozens of Uyghurs to China. Here is the U.S. State Department. There's Marco Rubio's name right there. And he's repeating all of these lies about Uyghur genocide in China. And he's demanding Thailand do this and China do that. And this is none of America's business. These are two countries on the other side of the planet. But why is he involved? Because the Uyghur narrative is still being used by this current administration to undermine China and to undermine the nations surrounding and working with China, and using Uyghur extremists as part of the solution. And after he warned and condemned Thailand for sending these Uyghur suspects back to China, where they came from and where they belong, the U.S. Embassy here issues an alert, a security alert, and it says on 27 February 2025, the Royal Thai government deported a group of 45 Uyghur asylees to China. Similar deportations have prompted violent retaliatory attacks in the past, most notably in the wake of the 2015 deportations of Uyghurs from Thailand. Improvised explosive devices detonated at the Erawan Shrine in Bangkok, a place that I have walked past many times myself, killing 20 people and injuring 125 others, as this shrine is heavily visited by tourists from China. So how dare Thailand send these poor innocent Uyghurs back to China? But because they did, Uyghur terrorists are going to bomb Thailand for it. Do you get what's going on here? And the last thing I wanted to show you regarding this, here's the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy. Its website still up, still in business, still funding sedition all around the globe. And this was from 2020, and they were talking about all of the Uyghur organizations that they back. If you look, this is a map of China. That's the Chinese flag. This is the East Turkestan separatist flag. There is no such thing as East Turkestan. This flag does not represent a real nation or region. This is used by the separatists, the U.S. backs. And there's a list of all the organizations, separatist organizations, the U.S. government is funding through the National Endowment for Democracy. And wouldn't you know, whose name is here? Can people see that? That's Marco Rubio's name right there. He's been in the thick of this all along. And people assured me, they said, Brian, Trump has to pick Rubio to get him through the Senate hearings. But once he gets through, Trump is going to have complete control over him. This is showing you that it's not Rubio on the leash. It is Trump on Rubio and the special interests he actually serves. He's on their leash. And I rest my case. Who wants to go next? Maybe go back to Danny, Rasheed, and Angelo.
Well, China, I mean, the United States under Trump 1.0, there was a very similar model to how I believe the Trump administration is going to approach China now. I don't know if you all remember in the beginning of the Trump administration, beginning 2016, 2017, he was saying very similar things to what he's saying now, that he has a great relationship with Xi Jinping, and that relationship is going to mean the U.S. and China will cooperate. He even went to China, and I have been talking to people about this, that he visited China, he met with Xi Jinping in Beijing, and how that is completely forgotten. Historical memory is something that the United States really lacks, and Americans have been totally victim to the incessant repression of any kind of understanding of history for so long that they can't even remember what happened under the first Trump administration, where he did something very similar. He said, well, we're going to work together. I have a great relationship with Xi Jinping. And then what happened? As you just showed, the Uyghur genocide, the propaganda war that exploded beginning in late 2017, 2018. And then, of course, we saw the Trump administration's posture take a completely aggressive turn, exacerbating the entire pivot to Asia that was begun under Obama, and then adding on in a more intense economic war component. And, of course, the propaganda war that was all along the lines in parallel with it. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, the deep state is dead, right? Everything has been decimated, USAID, NED, all of this. So the propaganda war on China will end. And that to me, if you just read the headlines of the media and you read what the Trump administration says, there's nothing that shows that that's actually happening. I sent to you all in the private chat something that I've been paying close attention to, which is an economic fact sheet, a memorandum from the Trump administration that recently came out talking about Trump's approach to foreign investment. And in that very short 700-word document, China is not only mentioned 12 times, but China is the complete focal point of everything the United States is supposedly going to do economically abroad. And if you could just look at the first several points toward the first half. The United States will establish new rules to curb the exploitation of its capital, technology, and knowledge by foreign adversaries such as China. The Trump administration will consider new and expanded restrictions on U.S. outbound investment to China in sensitive technologies, including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum biotechnology, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the same exact policy of the Biden administration. That's the same exact policy as the Trump 1.0 administration. We are not going to see the Trump administration get rid of semiconductor export bans, restrictions, sanctions, tech sanctions. He's already leveling on new tariffs. And then, of course, as you pointed out, Brian, this propaganda war on China, that's going to be there. That's going to be in the background. It's going to be very hard to revive the Uyghur genocide narrative after what happened in Gaza. That will be difficult to revive. But it will be a piece and part of an overall posture of painting and portraying China as a human rights catastrophe, as a so-called dictatorship, as a country that is inferior to the United States politically, so that the United States can continue on its agenda of encircling and economically provoking and militarily provoking China via war, via all of these forms of war. So that is what we can expect with China. Donald Trump could go in the next year. He could be in China, but that won't change the fact that for the next 3, and as he builds up toward these diplomatic gestures, so-called, the policies are not going to necessarily change. U.S.-China trade is also not going away. So anything he does there is nothing new. The United States cannot decouple from China to a significant degree, because if it does, it is going to destroy their economy. Whatever it's doing now to do that is actually destroying the U.S. economy. The tariffs, everyone wants to try to argue that tariffs are going to be different this time than Trump 1.0. A lot of people aren't even mentioning Trump 1.0 or Biden, but they think, oh, well, tariffs in the 1860s and 1850s and 40s, and, it was such a boon. Yeah, you know what else existed in the 1840s, 50s, 60s? Slavery, free labor. There was different conditions back then that allowed the U.S. to maximize its industrial capacity. None of that exists today. Actually, we know what tariffs did. China says it all the time. Hey, you want to 10, 25, 50% tariffs on us? Okay. Remember what happened in the first administration, Donald Trump? 90% of the costs of the tariffs were laid upon ordinary people, were laid upon the farmers and consumers and the workers. That is who is going to suffer from the tariffs more dramatically than anything that's going to happen to China. So we are seeing the path being built toward a continuation of the
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a